Welcome back to The Bible is Art, where we're currently in a series on a Christian guide to beauty and design. And if you haven't seen the videos up to now, I would recommend that you watch those before you watch this. But if you're ready to move on, today we're talking about the properties of, or what makes something beautiful. One of the things I dislike in many aesthetics books is how long it takes to get to any punchline, any insight into beauty. So let's just list the fundamental properties of beauty that we'll be talking about right here at the beginning. Something is beautiful when it has the following properties: unity, diversity, hierarchy, layers, balance, and form. Now, this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but it is necessary. Beauty is deep and mysterious, and we can never comprehensively understand its nature. But that doesn't mean that we cannot truly understand its nature. Just because I cannot know all things about prime numbers does not mean that I can't know some things about prime numbers. Skin is also mysterious and deep. We know that skin is made up of cells and chemicals. And the fact that we do not know the smallest particles that make up skin does not negate our knowledge that it is made up of cells and chemicals. So there's much more to beauty, but these are some of the fundamental properties of beauty. In this video, I want to briefly review each of these properties of beauty because we'll have videos on each one of them individually. But before we look at each of these properties, you might be thinking, wait, this seems kind of mundane or matter of fact. I mean, how do you know that these are the properties of beautiful things? Well, one of the hazards of giving the punchline in the beginning is that you don't get to set up the joke. I'm giving you the assertion before the argument, so the justification is coming. But if you haven't seen the first video, I recommend that you watch that because I deal with that question there. But the quick and dirty answer is the following. Everything we know comes from four sources: revelation, reason, tradition, history, and experience. So just telling you some of the foundational properties of beauty is the same thing as if you were to ask me what water is made out of, and I replied 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. A simple answer, but it took a very long time and a lot of hard thinking to get there. Scientists observing, thinking, and testing. But that's how we know. So now let's look at the properties of beauty. Unity and diversity. These are the 2 most fundamental aesthetic properties. From the beginning of the artistic task, you start with unity, a blank page. And your next task is to diversify, adding an element in addition to the white page. And as you keep adding new elements, you cannot add them indiscriminately. You must add them in a way that retains unity. I have a principle when I'm evaluating a piece of design that comes on my desk. And you can get at that principle by asking if the design is confusing or boring. If it is confusing, then there's not enough unity. But if it's boring, then there's not enough diversity. This is because if it is confusing, there's not enough visual features to give the piece a harmonious unity. If it is boring, there is not enough visual information to make it interesting, giving the viewer more and different things to look at. Furthermore, this principle of unity and diversity is not just an aesthetically fundamental principle, but philosophically and theologically as well. It is fascinating that one of the earliest philosophical questions was regarding the one and the many, how there can be unity and diversity. So also one of the first theological questions of the church was how God can be a unity and plurality. How can there be 1 and 3? Second, hierarchy. Once you start adding things, words, images, shapes to a blank page, increasing the diversity, in order for it to not be chaotic, there must be hierarchy. If there are, for instance, 3 objects, most of the time there will be one that is the most important, and that needs to be indicated visually. If there's no hierarchy established, people will not know where to look and where to look first. A good designer leads the viewers through the work, visually indicating the hierarchy, what should be seen first, second, and third. Third, layers. One of the happy byproducts of creating hierarchy is that it naturally creates layers, multiple levels of information and meaning, creating parts that are clear and others that are hidden. And in this way, it makes the artistic experience an adventure or a game. But layers of meaning can and should be created in other ways. For instance, perhaps the most common technique of layering levels of meaning is matching form and content. That is, you have the main theme, message, content of the work, and you communicate that through its form. A good example would be Caravaggio's painting, The Incredulity of St. Thomas, where you see Thomas inspecting the wound in Jesus' side, and on Thomas's tunic, there also appears to be a wound, a symbolic wound. This communicates that Thomas is taking on the death of Christ in himself, becoming conformed to his image. Thomas, the notorious doubter and thus far away from Jesus' character, with his hand in Jesus' wound, has been reversed to take on Jesus' identity. This symbolism is a layer deeper than the surface, and it takes work, attention, and delight to unearth it. Fourth, balance. Every great work of beauty is balanced. This does not mean that every work of beauty has a slavish symmetry. Balance is as subtle and deep as every other aesthetic property. But there will always be a sense of proper proportion, that one side is neither too heavy nor too light, but there is visual equity, resolve, and rest. To return once again to The Incredulity of St. Thomas, Caravaggio achieves balance in a subtle way. There is, of course, a balance of the 4 men, 2 in the middle and 1 on each side, but it is not exact. The mathematical middle is slightly to the right of the visual middle. And Caravaggio needed to do this because of the weight of luminance or brightness. The largest bright portion of the painting is Jesus' robe and chest. And as the eye is drawn first to the brightest things, that throws a large weight on the left side. Thus, Caravaggio needed to balance it. But he did not want to balance it with light for obvious reasons. He wanted Jesus to have the most light. So he chose another property of space to create weight. He puts more space on the right side to balance the light on the left. It is genius and beautiful. Fifth, form. Beautiful things have shape and edges, structure. They will have multiple distinct parts that are harmoniously and delightfully combined to create beautiful objects, beautiful forms. Things that are indistinct and formless lack the language to say much at all. Art and objects that do not have form are not necessarily wrong or ugly, but may simply occupy a lower level of beauty. For instance, the semi-formless work of Jackson Pollock was not intrinsically ugly, but not a high form of beauty. This was tacitly affirmed when Vogue chose Pollock's paintings as a background for a photo shoot with female models. That is, Vogue understood that there was a hierarchy in forms, in beautiful objects, and they placed the thing of higher beauty, the woman, as the main visual element, and the thing of secondary beauty, Pollock's paintings, as the background, the secondary visual place, subordinate to and complementing the highest beauty. So these 6 properties are fundamental attributes of beautiful and well-designed things. Once again, There's much, much more to beauty, but there's not less. In the next videos, we're going to look at each of these properties with examples from painting, architecture, and graphic design. And we will also be explaining how each of these are grounded in God's nature. Thank you so much for watching the next installment of this series. I really do appreciate it. Feel free to leave any questions below. If you know anyone who would be interested in this series, I would love if you could share it with them. If you would like to support the channel and this project, you can go to patreon.com/thebibleisart. Thank you so much. I will see you in the next video.